Throughout this section, we're going to take a look at working with LINQ, which stands for Language Integrated Query. If you're familiar with MySQL, it's very similar in the fashion that it allows us to filter through data, specifically filter through arrays and lists. So what I'm going to show you here is we're going to start very simple and work our way up to more complex operations with LINQ. Let's take a look at an example here. I have an array of names: John, Alex, Julie, Jesse, David, Mark, and Matt. Let's say here that I wanted to write a program that tells me if John is within this names array. How could I do that? Well, a typical way is to use a for loop or a for each loop, and we'll basically filter through that array. So basically for each name in the names array, I'm going to check to see if John exists. The way I do that is I can check the current index of name. So here, if name equals John, then John does indeed exist. And here we're going to say debug.log found John. Now this is a perfectly fine and quick way to filter through that list and find John. If I run this, you'll see here that in the console it's going to say found John. Perfect, right? Let's take a look at using LINQ to do the same operation. In order to use LINQ, we have to use the namespace using system.link. We'll save that. And I'm going to remove or comment out this for each loop. And we're going to actually do this entire operation in one line using what's called the any keyword. So to operate LINQ, we just start with the array, so names. And because we're using system.link, we now have several types that we can now use to help us filter through data. And there's a simple type here called any. And you'll see here that any is going to return a bool, and it allows us to basically cycle through this. It's an IEnumerable. What that means is basically it's like an inline for each loop. So here, names.any is going to return a bool, and it's going to check, does any of whatever I'm going to pass in exist? So here I'm going to say names.any. I'm going to open a parenthesis here, and you're going to see here that I can pass in a system.func string bool predicate. Now, if you remember from the delegates and events section of this course, we covered func, and it's just basically a newer version of delegates and events. And what this specific predicate allows me to do here is I can pass in a string and do some condition checking, and it's going to return a bool. So I'm passing in a string as a parameter, and it's going to return true or false in a bool format. So what am I doing within that list? What am I applying? What's the filter I want to apply? I want to check and see if John exists. So it's almost like an inline for each loop using a lambda expression. So here I'm going to say names.any, and I'm going to just say name goes to, and it's like an inline for each loop. I can say here name equals John. I'm basically running a condition. And what it's going to do is it's going to return true or false if the name John is within the names array. You can see here if I save this, right now it's going to give us an error because it's not assigned to anything. But what we've done here is I access the array names. I'm checking to see if any, and it's like an inline for each loop. Basically name is the same here. Name within the names array. And then here I'm checking to see if the current index of name that I'm looking at equals John, and it's going to return true or false. So typically when you're working with LINQ, you'll use the universal data type var. And here let's go ahead and say var name found equals this operation. So name found equals names.any, do any of the names equal John, true or false. And then all I'm going to do here is debug.log name found and append the name found. Let's save this, run our application, and take a look. And you'll see here that name found is true because John does indeed exist. And if I were to remove John by spelling it with two N's or even an H here, John, if we run this again, it will now return false. You'll see here in the console that the name found is now false because John is not spelled correctly within my check. So that is a very simplistic version of LINQ using a lambda operator.